There's a really interesting article in Harvard Business Review called Why Feedback Fails. Let me bring it up here. And a couple different things. What I thought was interesting is what happens when we give feedback, the feedback fallacy here. What happens when we give feedback to somebody? The feedback that we're giving is obviously from our perspective. And what the article goes through and gives different scenarios is that when you're not experiencing something immediately or in the moment where the other person that you're giving feedback to is experiencing, then you're not fully aware of all the decision-making opportunities that the person was going through the process. Does that make sense? So basically, they give a couple different examples that we do not have the ability to objectively give quality feedback because it's impossible for us to understand all the scenarios and situations or all the things that are relevant to that experience for that person. And so what our tendency is to go and you give feedback and say, hey, I saw that this happened. Why did you do that? Or next time do this. And what happens many times is people, they become defensive. But then more importantly, it's hard for people to relate to what you're saying because they don't see the experience that way. And I've managed people for a long time, and I've definitely saw that. I've gone to people where I've said, hey, next time do this. And they're like, well, I did do that because of this, this, and this. And then I say, well, no, because of this, this, and this. And it gets in kind of this back and forth, right? But at the end of the day, what consistently happens or what consistently is apparent is that the person that I'm listening to, quote unquote, defend themselves, they see what happened completely different. And so there's this quote here that say, that is why, despite all the training available on how to receive feedback, it's such hard work. Recipients have to struggle through this forest of distortion in search of something that they recognize as themselves when they're hearing the person give the feedback. That the recipient of the feedback has to struggle through the forest of distortion in search of something that they recognize as themselves. I mean, that's super powerful. One of the things that they use to justify the position of the paper is what medical physicians have discovered regarding pain. So a doctor can go through and do a procedure, and the patient can say, well, I'm in pain. And then the doctor can then say, well, it's a small procedure. You shouldn't be in pain. But if the person is reporting that they're in pain, whether it's true or not, it's their experience. So you can't, as the doctor, tell somebody their own experience. So it says here, the only realm in which humans are an impeachable source of truth is that of their own feelings and experiences. Doctors have long known this. When they check up on you post-op, they'll ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being high, how would you rate your pain? And if you say 5, the doctor may then prescribe all manner of treatments. But what she's unlikely to do is challenge you on your 5. They're not going to challenge you on that. And I love that. And so what it's suggesting here is when you want to have that conversation, that you really allow the person to explain their perspective on what happened. And it gives some examples later on. The next thing is that it says, even if you were to give good feedback that was accurate, what happens is because we are social in nature, we want our peers to look high on us and or look up to us. And so what can happen is if we recognize that a person sees something bad in us, it stimulates part of our nervous system. Now, our nervous system, we have 2 parts of the nervous system. 2 parts of the nervous system called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And you can see here, let's see here. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, here we go. Can you see this here? This turns on and off. Let's see if this comes up. There we go. So the parasympathetic nervous system is kind of our relaxing sympathy part of us. So when we're trying to go to bed, when we feel calm, when we feel in flow, when we feel good, we're in this parasympathetic nervous system state. The other part, when we feel challenged or when we feel unaccepted by our peers because we are social, or when we feel threatened by a physical harm, that's our sympathetic nervous system, and that's our fight or flight, and that turns on. What's interesting about the sympathetic nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system shuts off the first part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. Let me show you that. Prefrontal cortex. So here's the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is how you a lot of times have conversations, how you can think rationally. What happens is when we feel threatened, and we do typically feel threatened when we get feedback, it's just natural because we want people to like us, because we are tribal or we're social, this part of the brain will actually turn off. And when it turns off, we no longer have the ability to have a conversation fully. And so some people have the term triggered, if you've heard that before, like an experience or something triggers you and you become so upset and you act differently, and you tell yourself in your mind when you feel triggered, like, I need to calm down, I need to not be so upset, I need to not feel this way. But it's really difficult because the prefrontal cortex is getting turned off. And if the prefrontal cortex is getting turned off, guess what happens to our learning? We really lack the ability to have a conversation and learn. Now, other parts of the brain get turned on. So when we're stressed, we have this muscle memory that probably gets turned on because we remember the experience of a lion coming at us. So our sympathetic nervous system goes off, and the memory, the visual memory of it, the smell probably gets embedded, but conversation, to have a conversation of what you maybe need to improve, a task that's not life or death, really gets shut down. So in light of that, you want to make sure that when you are in a learning environment, that your parasympathetic nervous system, this one right here, is turned on, not this one. And so that's what it says and how we learn. It says here, focusing people on their shortcomings or gaps doesn't enable learning. It actually impairs learning. And so I thought that was really, really interesting, that focusing on shortcomings or gaps it doesn't enable learning, it impairs it. Let's see here. Oh yeah, and then the next thing says, which was really fascinating, is, one, we can't give good feedback. Two, or because we're not there, we don't fully understand. And then two, even if we were capable and able to give good feedback, that's not really how the brain learns. And then the third thing that they said is that excellence, which is an outcome that most people want, is objective. And so they give a couple different examples. And one in particular, which I thought was interesting, was the best basketball players in the world. If you look at and break down the way that they shoot the ball, they all shoot the ball differently. And it says here that even Rick Barry, the best ever on the day he retired. Let's see, Rick Barry, free throws. Apparently, he did underhand, and he was the best at it. Let's watch this. So, everybody teaches you how to play basketball. Let's see, he gets fouled. He's here at the line. 88% from the line. So the objective outcome of excellence is the hitting the basket, getting it in. And you could critique what he's doing as, oh, you're not doing it like everybody else, but it doesn't matter because the outcome of excellence is getting it in the hoop. And so what they say is that the outcome that we want for people sometimes is not as clear cut. Like, let's say you want the outcome of a comedy, people to laugh. Well, different people will laugh at different things. And so your definition of what makes something funny isn't necessarily the definition that everybody shares. So I thought that was really interesting. So again, adding to their ammo, one, we can't fully comprehend the situation. So because of that, we can't really give feedback. And if we could, give feedback, feedback is puts people on the defensive because people want to be accepted. And so it triggers the sympathetic nervous system. And when you trigger the sympathetic nervous system, learning gets shut down. And then the definition of excellence is different for different types of people, and you don't want to judge excellence generally. You want to look at the outcome, which I thought was really interesting. So for me, I think what this all comes down to, they give some examples of what to do, but in this world right now, and in my own personal world, I actually like directive feedback, critical feedback. I actually thrive on that. I like people to tell me blunt and open, hey, I don't like this, and hey, this is what needs to change. But I have noticed that when people do that, that instinctually, I tend to get defensive and try and defend my position. And I can see how that most people that this is naturally happens to. So in light of the world being like, transparent and bold in conversation, there's all these books. I think what's the title? Radical, not acceptance, but radical conversations. It's basically like being really bold with your conversations. But anyway, so they give some suggestions here. So all the suggestions say that if the conversation needs to be done, what you do is you focus on the positive that the person did. So anytime you see an attribute such as this guy, Rick Barry, making the basket, the coach, instead of saying, oh, next time try overhand, he should say, hey, Rick, way to put it in. Great work. What did you like about that? Or what was it that inspired you? Or what did you notice? And Rick may say, you know what, I'm having shoulder pain, and I actually going underhand works better for me. And so as long as the outcome is there, then it shouldn't really matter how it gets there because it's effective. Let's see here. They give a bunch of different examples that I felt were kind of a little too soft and hoity-toity, but I think the takeaway was for you as a person, when you are in a managerial position, when you're having a conversation with somebody, really try and understand where they're coming from, listen to what they said, don't make them feel attacked. And it gives a couple different scenarios where when the task is more clear-cut, then you can be probably more directive with your feedback. But when there's ambiguity in the process, then it's better to err on the side of them learning for themselves. But yeah, that was the takeaway from the thing. They did say that when you sit down with somebody, that there's 3 things that you want to talk about: the present first, then you want to talk about the past, then you want to talk about the future. So what you would say is, what's bothering you right now, or what about that experience did you not like? They'll tell you, and then you say, in the past, what did you notice that worked well for you? And then they'll say, then you would switch after they respond to that. In the future, what do you want to do differently? So that's my synopsis of that article.